So, if you guys have been paying attention to a little bit of the buzzing behind the scenes recently in the World of Warcraft classic and also vanilla scene, then you might have heard some rumblings about a new server that's really caught a lot of steam over the last couple of weeks. And I alluded to this on last week's podcast, saying I'd be talking about it soon, and here we are now, no time like the present. And it's a return to a conversation about private servers here on Countdown to Classic, because this is a private server that we'll be discussing. And many of you long-time listeners might be wondering, Josh, what the fuck are we doing? Like, private servers are yesterday's news, man. We got Classic. Well, I still want to talk about what's newsworthy, and I very much so deem this newsworthy because it's something that I'm really intrigued by. I had a million questions for the guys running this server, and I'm so happy to be joined by one of those people today involved in the project. Wall, mate, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing very well.
That's great, mate. Thanks so much for doing this. Look, I've got a million questions for you, and I guess it's a good time to start off with a very holistic view at what we're talking about here today, because as I've just sort of scratched at there in the intro, Wrath of the Lich King Classic it's been announced. It's not that far away. A lot of the Classic community, they've been there over the years. They know the history of what we went through, the private server era, the petition, the move on to Classic, going through the expansions now with TBC and Wrath. A lot of us are pretty well versed with the story. And now here, you and I are in mid-2022 discussing a private server. And it might throw a few people astray going, what is going on? But I think it's been, something that should be noted of the rise of what I should say now is the Everlook project that you're a part of over the last couple of weeks. So let me first question is, have you been shocked at all by the reception, 18,000 people jumping in your Discord over a couple of weeks, to the prospect of a new vanilla private server project?
There's still tons of buzz around private servers because they just simply offer a better quality experience than a big company can. And it's really sad, but a big company just cannot care more than we do. We have passionate people on the project who work constantly to maintain it, to improve it, to offer the players a better experience when we're not making money from this. It's passionate, purely passion. And players recognize that and they understand that. They've seen it in the past that we just simply have a better product, which again, it's a free to play game that's emulated. And all we're doing is just trying to relive that game, really at the end of the day.
Fair enough. We've on the show in years gone past, we've definitely had discussions about, the murky grey waters of the legality of private servers and all of that stuff. I'm not going to go into that territory today. I'm not particularly interested in conversations that we've done before, but it's interesting to hear you, and understandably, I should say, I don't want to sound like I'm coming after you because I am in agreement with you in terms of the passion and, perhaps the knowledge shown by yourself and many of the people that do take up the mantle of organizing and running a private server. And we've definitely seen in iterations in the past, private servers have shown that, a quality product can be achieved by what I very respectfully would still refer to you as amateurs, if that's okay. Well, actually, Wall, I should stop myself there. What's your background? Have you worked in the industry at all? Or, obviously you know your stuff technically and development-wise.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing game development stuff since I was a kid. I went to school for some computer programming, and it really was just a hobby of mine for the longest time. I was doing the Wallcraft thing for quite a while, almost 2 years, just developing a totally customized alpha through vanilla World of Warcraft experience. But yeah, as soon as I heard about this project, I knew I wanted to get involved. We were looking to restore the Light's Hope experience into a more modern framework, which is vMangos, essentially an updated version of the Light's Hope core. And players often remember that as the best private server vanilla experience that they had. And it's something that they were really disappointed in regards to how Classic worked out compared to, old Nostalrius or Elysium, Light's Hope, any of the old projects.
I'm going to go off on a million tangents, by the way, mate. So I do apologize for how scattered all these questions are going to be. There's already like three or four things I've got pinned in my brain that I've got to come back to. But we'll get to the Lights Hope thing in just one second because I want to go back to what I was saying before, which is just that as I was saying, I don't want to devalue, your knowledge, your work, your skill, your proficiency at all by, I think it would be fair. Tell me, would it be fair to refer to you and the team as basically amateurs? You're doing this as a hobby for fun?
Most of the team are professionally involved in some sort of IT or computer related
Yep.
industry during their day jobs.
Yep.
But yeah, this is like an after work hobby project for most of us.
And that's the part I love about it in that I don't think it's unfair to do a little bit of a shots fired moment when we do have these conversations about the deep knowledge that these fans that do other things for full-time employment but dabble in, game development as, as you say, an after-school project and have pulled off these things in the past, certainly have a track record. Now, don't get me wrong, we'll get into the spotty track record of private servers as well. There's ups and there's downs. But there are definitely some high highs of technical proficiency, really impressive networking and server output, and also just, I really want to focus in on this one, a deep, deep knowledge of the game that to me has been the most frustrating part about dealing with Blizzard through the years of the classic franchise to this date. Now, I'm not trying to set you up for a Blizzard bash. I'm more trying to say, my question is more based on, I can only imagine how good it feels for you when you work with people that you don't have to query how well they know this game. You talk about things like progressive itemization, phase rollout and things like that. And you're on the same level with people that know their shit as opposed to what we've seen with a bit of bumbling and fumbling on the Blizzard side of things. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's really unfortunate because they have direct access to all the information that we don't. As developers, and especially the people within the VMangos community, those guys, they spend all their time and resources to create something that is as accurate a replication of the original game when the multi-billion dollar company has access to that information already, yet they can't put it out themselves. And again, it's not that I'm angry at Blizzard because they're just a company. They can put out a product. I personally didn't play Classic at all. I simply won't pay for a game that I can play for free. And personally, I don't even play much anymore myself. I just like making it because we can do it better, and it's just at the end of the day, that's the answer.
Yeah, fair enough. And a lot of that stuff, it comes down to personal choice. And I'll say it from the outright. There's a lot of people listening here that will get upset by this, but there's certain portions of the private server community that just, they're set in their ways in terms of thought about, paying for a Blizzard product or whatever. But like, I'm totally fine with playing both of these. I'm the kind of individual that can run two MMOs at the same time. I'm going to play Wrath Classic and I'm going to play Everlook. I have no drama with that. I know there are the people that kind of turn their nose up at that and go, ew, as if you'd pay for Classic. And I'm not saying that's what you're saying, mate, but I like to dip my toes in the water of multiple fields and also given that I've got to cover this stuff, on the podcast, I like to know what's going on. But I have no drama with doing both. I think that it's an interesting thing where it is easy to do the new knee-jerk reaction of jump on the Blizzard pile. But I have said historically on the show, if you don't give them credit for the, I don't want to say rare instances, but the instances where they do actually do something good, then there's no point to being a critic. Do you know what I mean? I'm someone who has acknowledged that there have been, a few good things over the years, but I've ultimately, particularly now, gotten to a point where my disgruntlement is palpable. So that's why, I can imagine you guys are trying to reach out to people like me who have played Classic and dangling that cherry in front of us and saying, have you considered this at all?
Yeah, and it's a tough situation. A lot of people are excited, especially because Wrath of the Lich King was their favorite expansion. So, personally, I don't blame anybody for playing any of the Blizzard franchise content when they're releasing it. they have a big community, which is the biggest draw for the game. Really, is big community. People can complain that servers are dead, but come Wrath of the Lich King, there's going to be tons of servers that are going to have tons of people on, and you're going to have a fun time. A big issue with Wrath of the Lich King in particular is that there isn't as much content to do. So if you're playing the game 8 hours a day, you're going to run out of stuff to do. Like, it doesn't take long. And after 2, 3 months of doing Naxxramas and progressing through Ulduar and all that, you're going to be looking for other ways to sink a couple extra hours throughout the day into something else, like yourself. So why not come play Everlook? You can make a free account. It's totally free. You just play at your own pace. And vanilla is a long game. It's 2 years is the overall progression of the server. So, it's not like you're ever going to fall behind, really. So don't ever feel like that. Even if you're only hitting 64 or 5 months into the server, you'll catch right back up. ZG comes around and you're good.
All right, mate. I'll say at the outset, I was laughing to myself just then, going like, "All right, well, settle down, pluggy McPlugface. We'll get there. We'll get there." But, mate, we'll relax a little bit. I've gotten the stuffy sort of 10-minute opening out of the way there, just to set everyone up and let them know what we're discussing. Because, as I said, I've got a lot of listeners who won't know what the fuck this is all about, and this is the first they're hearing of it. But now, for sort of proverbially undo the pants and chill out a bit, I've got a bunch of questions, mate. And something you said about 5 minutes ago piqued my interest, because whilst I've definitely kept abreast of the private server happenings over the last few years, particularly much more so in the last 6, 7, 8 months, you continuously, and other people continuously, invoke the name Lights Hope. Now, it's funny because we talk about private servers that have been notable over the years, and obviously Nostarius comes to mind. Everyone knows the Nostarius story. People do talk about Northdale as well after the Classic announcement, that they had really good timing in terms of capturing that hype and getting a lot of people to do their, test runs or whatever for Classic on Northdale. But people bring up Lights Hope a lot as well, and I get a bit confused because I'm like, I missed Lights Hope. What was it that made, like, that's not the same thing as Northdale, right? Like, what was it that made Lights Hope so good?
Lights Hope was Northdale.
My
The two
apologies.
servers,
Okay.
yeah. Well, originally the server was Lights Hope, but then when Northdale launched, it became Lightbringer and Northdale as the two servers. The Lights Hope project, though, overall, people miss it because it was the most advanced development from the vanilla private server community in terms of how the game was smooth. There was no lag. You could play with 10,000 people online with no latency issues. You could have 1,000 people in a city and you wouldn't, have any problems. Just the core behind it was very, very powerful. And that was the last real project before vanilla retail came out, classic. So people remember that most fondly because it was the best product of the time. And people will always have that type of phenomenon where, they'll look back at the past and they'll say, "Oh, this was the greatest," and you compare everything to it, which is good. That really should be the standard, which is why we hope to set the new standard. And the development to this core isn't just a Lights Hope copy paste. It's vMango's core with Lights Hope values inserted very, very carefully by hand for every mob. And we're trying to emulate the best, smoothest experience for the players while still having the updated modern framework, the architecture behind it.
Okay. Mates, I want to go into the technical aspect of things because I'm sure this is definitely the waters in which you wade on the project. So I'm going to warn everyone, probably the next, 10, 15, 20 minutes, we're not going to as much talk about gameplay and content. I'm really interested in how these servers work on a technical aspect. So, mate, you've mentioned things like, 10,000 people being online. The other thing that comes up to mind is large, really large scale world PvP and things like that. And I vividly remember almost instantly people pointing at Classic and finding out that this wasn't really a possibility, and their servers just buckling under the pressure of what I would barely call medium sized world PvP. And the outcry came very quickly saying, why can private servers do this? Once again, we point to these guys are a group of amateurs doing it. Why is the server behaving quite markedly differently from what we see on, a different server, an official server over here with Blizzard? I wanted to ask a few questions about that and also some things along the 1.14 versus 1.12 client line. So if I can just get you to switch your brain into that frame. Um, get as technical as you want to get, mate. There's going to be a lot of people that listen to the podcast that will know exactly what the fuck you're talking about. But when it comes to that large scale world PvP and the stress on the servers, tell me specifically why private servers can do it and official servers cannot.
Well, there's a one fundamental problem is that we don't really know how Blizzard has their setup going. They don't really reveal that because it's a security thing. That's why our project emulates the back end to the best of really our knowledge. It's a lot of guesswork, but you get a lot of information coming and going through traffic to and from the server that you can kind of study to better emulate it. The problem, though, that Blizzard has is chances are they're very cheap and they host a lot of stuff on the same servers. You could be playing on a WoW server that also hosts, some other games server emulation running, and you don't know that. You don't really know that. So it's like they have a lot of overhead on the servers, whereas ours are uh, either cloud-based solutions you can go with, but we particularly prefer to use, uh, actual hardware, and it's what's running the game independently, strictly, and solely. So when you have that type of setup, you have very low latency. You have a lot of resources being able to put directly towards one specific thing, and it is just a better back end, really. And the end result of that is a better back end.
Is it expensive on your end? Because obviously I don't want to say like the meme, but I don't know how close to reality is. I doubt it's not that close. I would say it's not that close when people talk about, the joke is the Russian guy with the server sitting in his basement, being maintained by one guy in a damp room. But how expensive is it to run a private server? And I presume it's probably something that you'll have to correct me, mate. I know nothing about what I'm talking about now, but rented out of a professional operation somewhere in Europe with a room full of 1,000 servers that you just take one and say, yep, I'll take that one for the next year. Here's your $4,000 or whatever the fuck it is. Like, how does it work for you guys?
Well, there's really two routes you can go. Some servers are run, like you said, from somebody's basement, but a lot of people, they have money or they have resources to invest in the project to where they can actually get professional equipment. Some of the stuff that I work with personally at work, it's like I could pick this up for 10 grand and it would cost me basically nothing outside of internet and electricity to host the server. The problem is that you want the absolute best that you can get for your money. So going with a paid solution is typically better. Like you said, server farm solution. And that's what basically all projects, big projects at least, use. They charge really, it's variable depending on how much traffic, how much data and electricity really that you're using for your equipment there that you're renting out. Uh, I don't have the exact numbers on Light's Hope, but you can basically guess you're going to be spending $200 to $400 depending on the size of your server. Two being, a very mid-range type number, with 400 being extremely big multi-project server. Something like a few of the other Wrath of the Lich King projects where they have 5 or 6 different servers running at the same time for the game. That definitely costs some money, which when they run and offer and implement a cash shop type solution, which is something that we would never do here because we would never have any need for it. But a big project like that does have cash shop, like a Wrath of the Lich King project, they have to make money for a server solution because they're getting a lot of traffic with multiple projects running.
Okay, mate. On the client side, again, I have to apologize because you are talking to someone who is really not well versed in this stuff, and I've just picked up what I have through osmosis through reading all the conversations over the years. But I have seen an interesting little debate spark up amongst I shouldn't say your community because I'm there too, amongst the community, about the arguments for and against the 1.14 client that's been developed recently by Blizzard in relation, what we got with Classic, what started out as 1.13, then evolved into 1.14 now with TBC Classic that we're playing right now, versus the old 1.12 client that many private server players would be so used to over time. The differences, I don't think it's a hyperbolic statement to say the differences are night and day. By all means, please, mate, argue against me if you disagree. But tell me, before we get into which is better per se, I just want to know your thoughts as a dev overall on what we got with what is now 1.14 versus the old 1.12.
Oh, there's tons of differences in the clients. It's night and day. The 1.14 client, personally, I've only used maybe 3 or 4 times while testing out Hermes proxy, which is proxy that's used to translate the opcodes
Yeah, I was going to
and
ask you
all
about
the
that one soon.
structures.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the way that it works for a lot of people who don't understand is the vMangos emulation server, it communicates with the 1.12 client natively, and all the information that is sent between those 1.12 client and the vMangos server, it has a very particular structure, whereas the 1.14 client sends totally different information. So to translate that to something that the server can understand, which is what Hermes proxy does, um, it's very comprehensive. But the problem is anti-cheat checks and things like Warden, which use memory checks, they're totally different, and that's not been developed yet. It's not finished, and it's not really within the immediate scope of their project. You'd have to ask the developers more about that, but that's just simply something that is a limiting factor into using that type of client on a big project like this. If there were developments made to allow these security measures to be totally functional and there was no major downside to allowing players to use it, we definitely would. But that's just simply not the case right now, which is unfortunate.
Okay, so outside of, let's say, feasibility, let's throw that argument out the window of whether or not you can or can't do it. It's been really, really interesting. And again, I'm sorry, I know I'm pushing it with you because, like you say, you've only used it about 3 or 4 times and only through Hermes. Whether or not you've talked to other people about it, but I was really, really, I don't want to say shocked, but like taken aback a little bit by the amount of private server players really going into bat quite heavily for 1.12. Now, again, guys, fucking opinion incoming. I'm sorry I feel this way personally, but I do. To the private server Andes out there, the diehards, I and a lot of my friends felt like the 1.14 client was smooth as butter. We really enjoyed it. Whether or not the client has anything, and maybe you can answer this when I throw it to you, whether or not the client has anything to do with the world PvP issues, I don't know. That might just be network side and not client side. But, outside of things like that, I'm like, this client is just like a Ferrari to me. But a lot of people are going, no, no, no. If you know your things, if you know your stuff about software and all the technical bullshit, you would understand what a, beautiful dinosaur 1.12 is. Can you tell me why? Is it just classic Andes being classic Andes who will, cheer for their football team against all odds? Or is there actually a viable argument there for under the hood, there's a lot of beauty to 1.12?
Yes and no. There is a lot of beauty to it, but the people who argue that the 1.12 client is better than the current client, I'm sorry, you're wrong. Like from a technical level, that's not true. The 1.12 client definitely does feel more apt for playing vanilla WoW, and I'd rather use the 1.12 client over the 1.14 even if I had the option. But under the hood, even the 1.11 client was better than the 1.12 client. There was a lot of things that were messed up in the 1.12 client that they said, well, we're not just going to fix that because we're releasing the TBC client now anyway. So it was kind of like put on the back burner back in the day for Blizzard. Um, there's so many limitations with the 1.12 client. As a developer, I'd rather work with a 1.14 client if that were even, feasible to do within the future. And I would say, yeah, in another 5 years, people are probably going to consolidate most
projects down to a modern client because Blizzard will have rolled through all of the expansions themselves in Retail Classic and TBC and Wrath of the Lich King, and they all use the modern updated client. So once private servers kind of consolidate to using the new proxy, once it's finished developing, it'll just be easier across the board for private server developers to do like custom stuff, map edits, behind the scenes, under the hood type work using a new client because then all the tools can be shared and you won't have 80 tools all together just for 4 expansions to have to juggle around.
That's interesting to hear you say that. So basically, you're kind of saying it's, in your guess, it would be somewhat of an inevitability that in a few years' time, all private servers would probably just suck it up and go off this client once we've had more time with it. Like, it's just too soon right now. Is that it?
Yeah, and I mean, really, who knows what the future is going to bring? But if we had, for some reason, we had a lot of people working on private server WoW development over the next 10 years, we would probably see everything consolidated down into one core that could run all expansions perfectly with one universal client that runs all expansions perfectly. And all of the stuff can be edited with just a small set of tools behind the scenes as a developer. That's ideal. And honestly, I could see that happening because if you like understand the Mangos family of projects, there's a lot of different types of Mangos projects, but all of them are for different expansions specifically. However, they can all essentially function across the board. That's always kind of been a bigger goal because most Mangos development is done for Wrath of the Lich King and TBC. Vanilla is actually one of the least popular ones to develop because there's so many restrictions with vanilla, a lot of limitations. Yeah, it's just that's how it is though, and we're just really waiting to see what the future holds in terms of where these developments take place and where they happen and where they lead to.
No worries. So, on the subject that you raised really briefly before, the Hermes proxy thing, I had not heard of this until a week ago. And now that I know, vaguely what it is, it was interesting to hear you guys address this very briefly in your Q&A session that you had about the server last week. And it was a very brief answer, understandable. Just, no, it's not going to be a thing. It's not going to be allowed. I get that. If I can ask you just to somewhat extrapolate on the answer you gave last week a little bit here now, if you can just sort of explain to people what Hermes proxy is, and also why, it might be a very easy answer, why is it that that's something that's just a no-go for you guys at the moment?
Yeah, I'll just kind of recap on that. Hermes proxy is basically a program that you run that intercepts all of the information being sent between your client and the server, and it translates it for the specific server architecture of the client, depending on what you're using. Um, in early development for Hermes proxy, if I recall, I was able to play my vanilla private server using, was it Wrath of the Lich King client or WAD client. There's a lot of different neat things that can be done to essentially keep the structures the same for both client and server while just simply translating information being sent between them. And it's a phenomenal development. Britannia has done amazing work with it. We're still waiting for a few, minor things, but it's pretty much done. The big issue though is warden checks are totally different. And a few people have been talking about and working on some things to kind of resolve that. There is uh, some client side stuff that you can do to enable warden checks, but the problem is you need a solution from the back end to be able to tell what client is connected and run the appropriate warden checks on that client to make sure that they're not using cheats. And to play with Hermes proxy, you need to disable strict client checking, which leads to other issues like people being able to edit maps. And the server, you could definitely make it so that it could tell that they're doing that, but the problem is you can't really enforce it since everybody's using a different version of the client. It's like it's almost impossible at that point to really consider that.
All right. Very good, mate. We've gotten through the technical conversation. Thank you so much for that. You've answered a lot of the things that I wanted to know. I was just picking away at my brain the last few days that I was intrigued by. But mate, we'll bring it back now to a fairly chunky conversation about the content and also the community. One really broad question that I want to open up with here is, and please feel free to answer as expansively as you want or as narrowly as you want. I just want you to speak honestly on this one. It's a tough question in terms of private servers over the years. Again, I think it's very fair to say have shown the players have a certain fickleness to them when it comes to rolling on a server, loyalty to a server, maintaining player bases. Again, it's a meme, but it's a reality, the fresh meme of people constantly chasing the next fresh. And, we talk about the classic franchise, and over the years on the podcast repeatedly refer to it as chasing the dragon. We're all trying to chase how it felt the first time back in 2004, 2005, whenever you started playing World of Warcraft. And classic, has been us trying to get that moment back. And obviously with classic, a lot of people very quickly realize the way in which the player base approaches the game now. Classic is not vanilla. You're never getting that feeling back. All you can try and do is try and get as close as you can to that. The reason I'm saying this is when we relate that to private servers, I feel like you've got this spectre of Nestarius sitting there. And Nestarius was... I'll have another question about Nestarius specifically in a second, but for all the myriad of reasons that Nestarius took off, it was huge, undoubtedly, and still captures the heart and souls and minds and memories of all the people that played on it, and they still talk about it to this day, obviously very fondly. Do you get the impression that private server players are chasing the dragon that was Nestarius, much like classic players are chasing the dragon that was Vanilla WoW?
Oh yeah, 100%. It's just what they're familiar with. It's what they loved. It's what they grew up with. It's in most of the people, they played WoW back in the day through the original expansions up until about Cataclysm. That's most of the player base here. So they remember the originals, and the private servers that they played on, a decade and a half later, were just amazing. They were a really good experience. They had a lot of fun, and it was just a great time that they were able to spend back in the world of Azeroth. In terms of, are they chasing the dragon on it? Oh yeah, 100%. It's like the next fresh type crowd. They're always screaming fresh and when, and they want the new release so that they can have the most fun and get that dopamine rush that they want, and then they want to chase that again when the server starts getting more grindy and played out. But a lot of the people, they love the game, so they end up playing all the way through, and they have a great time. But there's always that next fresh, which is always in something in people's minds, which is why you want to release the new server every couple of years and have people have something to look forward to in that regard. But does the game still elicit that response? Of course, because it's fun. The game is fun. Nobody playing will ever deny that. The game is just fun.
Okay. Well, now that we've sort of set that up, that leads to my follow-up question, which is, like you say, I agree with you. Yes, private server players are definitely chasing that dragon. And it's a really big issue, in my opinion. And you see people on subreddits and everything lambasting the like I said, the tenuous loyalty of many private server players who do jump ship and jump ship and jump ship on a regular basis just because server launches are either so fun or that particular server wasn't as great as they'd hoped it would be or whatever it might be. But to have that first problem of the next fresh is always just around the corner, and now in 2022 to have a second huge problem of classic existing being, I mean, let's be honest, it's such an odd thing that I'm about obviously to put to you as a private server developer, that you're dealing with Blizzard as competition. But those are two really big factors that might throw a monkey wrench in, your plans. So my whole setup, Wall, is this question: can a popular private server exist in a post-classic world while, acknowledging those two really big issues of the fickleness of private server loyalty, player loyalty, and the fact that Classic exists and is, undeniably a bit of a leviathan.
Yeah, I honestly I don't think Classic is really any type of threat to private servers aside from the fact that it dwindled the player base because they have another outlet. The people who play private servers will always play private servers in that regard. I think the crowd is a bit separated between a divide. And there are people who will play both. They'll play classic and private servers, or they'll switch between both back and forth just for the expansions that are coming out from classic. But at the same time, I think that the people who play private servers, and the people who play retail, they play retail. That's kind of always been the case. You saw a lot of people obviously switch over to classic retail just because the continuity of all three expansions being pretty much a guaranteed thing from the get go. I think everybody knew when Classic came out that they would be doing at least Wrath, maybe Cataclysm. So who knows? Maybe they'll go all the way through Shadowlands. And so, but people like that idea is that there is a place where your character is going to last. And a lot of people, they fail to realize that, well, the private server projects have also done that. I took my character from Northdale and Lightbringer and I put them on Light's Vengeance when that launched. And I played TBC with the same characters that I had from back in the day. So it's something that we can do, and if we launch a new fresh in 2 years, we could have an option for a legacy server that launches with, characters put on it to where they can just go on their characters on a separate server, a separate realm. There's a million options to retain the information that players have worked so hard on, which is, something that people realize more and more these days. That was always a big argument that, well, if you play the private server, your character might disappear one day. Well, yeah, even so, that's the game though. That's always been the game. You start fresh, and that's really so there has to be a balance between chasing fresh and understanding the importance of it.
Fair enough. It's interesting to hear you say that, and I do agree to a certain extent that, private server players are going to private server, classic players are going to classic, and then, yeah, sure, there's some in between that might dabble in both. I'm with you there. However, I do wonder about the following scenario. Now, look, it's my prediction that you obviously just have Season of Mastery. It did not go as planned, I've no doubt, on the Blizzard side of things. I'm someone who, again, guys, whether or not you disagree with me, that's fine. But my take on Season of Mastery has been I applauded them for the effort, but not for the execution. I think they whiffed massively. However, I had to encourage them for trying new things. I think it was the right idea, but just again, on the management side of things, it kind of fell apart very quickly. However, I'm personally of the belief that post-Wrath Classic launch, they might have another stab at it and simply do a fresh vanilla. Just like Classic was, hey guys, so you didn't like Season of Mastery, that's all good, we've got your backs, here's your world buffs back, here's the game as you love it, just 12-month Classic fresh, let's go get into it. That's personally what I think. If I had to bet, that's what I would bet on. I think they're going to do that in early 2023. They might not, don't get me wrong, but in a scenario where something like that does happen, because it happens to Darashire. I pronounce it Darashire, but people fucking lose their minds when I pronounce it my way. So I'll say for everyone, Darashire. They absolutely sunk that one with the launch of Season of Mastery. Obviously, I talked about Darashire on the show when it was coming out. I played on Darashire. And then I think it was very, very quickly, within a month or two, Season of Mastery launched. Completely killed that project. Do you have any concerns that Blizzard might have a similar plan up their sleeves for you guys? Or are you truly of the mind that, no, I don't care if they'll do it. We'll keep all our players because we're private servers, ride or die. Are you really not concerned about a bunch of the players drifting over to official?
I think Darrowshire, personally, suffered from a few things. It wasn't just Season of Mastery coming out. I personally don't know a ton of people that had left. I would say maybe 10% of the people who left within the first 3 months maybe left for Season of Mastery. The other 90%. They all left for various reasons too. In terms of Darrowshire, it had a pretty solid launch, but private servers, yeah, their population has dwindled since there is a retail version of the game out. And a new Season of Mastery launching would definitely reduce player numbers, but people understand that private servers, they launch fresh with 10,000 people, and they pretty much drop down to 3 or 4,000 within the first couple months. And that's a perfectly fine player base number. We're not looking just strictly for numbers. We want to offer the best experience that we can give to the players.
I agree. Yep.
A lot of people, they see that experience that they can get from a private server versus any type of Blizzard maintained server, and that's why they play. So really, the big appeal is to just have a good server, and whether or not we have massive player numbers is totally irrelevant as long as we're offering a good product. However, of course, that being said, we want to make sure that we time our launch right so that we're not being affected by any type of official classic retail launch, which is why we're hoping to postpone the launch until after Wrath of the Lich King is out. People have kind of gotten bored of that already, or they run out of stuff to do. If a Season of Mastery launched, frankly, I think that it was more of a novelty the first time and whatever, but I don't think many people are scrambling to play a new Season of Mastery. And the people that are already playing it, so they're not really our player base to begin with.
Well, maybe not a new Season of Mastery, but as we said, I think your project definitely has shown, I think enough time has elapsed now that people are getting a bit tingly over the thought and prospect of a fresh vanilla. I've definitely been one of the tens, hundreds of thousands of people around the world that really questioned and slammed Blizzard's decision of the launch window of Season of Mastery, going like, the timing, not so sure, that was a bit too soon executus, you know what I mean? However, now that we are, by the time Wrath comes, and certainly a couple of months further down the track from Wrath's release, as you guys are certainly counting on, I think players worldwide are shaking off their vanilla fatigue and are ready for another vanilla experience. So, sorry, man, I'm not trying to push you too hard. I don't want you to make. I don't want to sound like I'm being a dick here. I'm just sort of saying, like, are there the concerns amongst the team or not at all that vanilla, desire amongst players worldwide, not only it attracts people to your project, but if Blizzard did something that they might equally be as appealing, it might be as appealing to those players.
Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I mean, I can't speak for anybody individually. Like I said, myself personally, I've never paid Blizzard any money for any of their versions of retail. I've never played them. I don't plan on it. I'll never log into a Season of Mastery to check it out. That's not really my interest. And most people that I know feel the same way. So it's like, if it happens, it happens. If not, it's whatever. It's really just what people choose to do with their time and with their money, really. And that's the big draw to private servers is that, again, it's free. Like, you don't have to pay anything. So there's no cash shop. There's no in-game incentives. We don't accept any donations. It's a passion project that's totally free to play. So if you want to come play it, you're not wasting time or money, really. So
it's a tough question to answer. I know I'm pushing a bit hard on something that's way too up in the air. But maybe we'll change track. And you said something about the date, and I know you guys, obviously can't say anything about the specific, month or day or whatever that you're looking to launch this thing, and I'm not going to be stupid enough to ask. But the one thing I will ask is, it's interesting to hear you say that you've locked in on a post-Wrath Classic release that you guys would be looking to launch. I was wondering, I've been sort of sitting around trying to throw darts at the calendar as well and figure out when you guys might launch. And again, please feel free to tell me if I'm a fucking idiot, but I was like, would it be equally advantageous for you guys to launch a couple of months before Wrath, just as it would be a couple of months after Wrath, in terms of you get people on the server, they level up, all of a sudden they've developed some form of attachment to this character that they might not want to bail to Wrath Classic for, and bing, bang, boom, we've got them hooked, they're loving the server's great, we move forward with the player base. As opposed to Wrath launches, they play a bit of Wrath, We hope they don't get hooked on that. We hope they get burned out on Wrath, and then they come check out our project. Now, I know there's pros and cons on both sides, but my question is just, was there any discussion or serious thought amongst the dev team about launching pre-Wrath launch?
Yeah, and I mean, it's something that we looked at. It's a possibility. It's really just whenever we want to pick out a good time without interfering with other projects as well. So we figured, all right, after Wrath is probably going to be the best time. It'll give us plenty of time to play test the new core and all the developments that we're going to be using. The updates to the database need to be double checked, triple checked, just to make sure that nothing's awry. We want to make sure that the hardware is all set up, that everything's running. We want to stress test properly, especially when we transfer everything over to a hosted solution. We need to essentially either take the back end and convert it to, we might be using Ubuntu, so we'll need to convert it and recompile the core for Linux and test to make sure that that works out. If we end up going with the Windows option, which is the configuration right now, we'll have more information that we can test and more data that we can really pull from the back end as it's running. But there's other downfalls with that. So there's a lot of stuff that needs to be set up right, and before we even attempt to launch and have some sort of issues on the launch because things weren't done right, we'd rather just play patient and do it right. And it's pushing it off is a concern for people simply because the hype was already here and people are excited for a new server. And I understand waiting is the hardest part, but there's other stuff to do. And the fact is, too, if we launch at the end of the year, for most players that are in school or they're settling in for the winter, it'll give them something to do. A lot of people want to go spend their summer doing stuff. They don't want to play vanilla grindfest 16 hours a day. But when the year slows down, they're looking for something to do. It's perfect caveat for them to actually join the server.
All right, mate. Let's. I've put you through the pain of all these questions so far. I've probably let off with the hardest questions for the first 50 minutes, but look, let's get to some of the easier stuff that'll probably be a bit more fun to talk about for you. We as we dive into the content of the game, and guys, in about we'll see how we go. In about 20-30 minutes, I might start inviting some listener questions as we do now focus on the content of the server as opposed to all the extraneous shit that we've just discussed. Mate, obviously it's very easy, and private servers do mainly focus again on the negatives of Classic, and I didn't like this and I didn't like that and fuck this and fuck that. That's all well and good, but as a dev, were there any changes or content tweaks that you know of from either Classic or Season of Mastery that did sort of intrigue you as a developer? Now, I'm not saying I agree with these examples or particularly like them. I'm just raising them to you as examples so you know where I'm going with this. Things like the changing the behavior of mobs in dungeons in Season of Mastery so that mage boosting couldn't be a thing. Things like the raid changes that we got in Season of Mastery. Things like the chrono burn, which again, I don't give a fuck about chrono burn, but just using it as an example. Did you spot anything over the life cycle of Classic to date that actually gave you pause and went like, that's not bad. That'd be interesting to play with?
I mean, there's a lot of cool ideas. I don't really have to ponder because I have my own custom vanilla project where if I like something, I add it. No matter what it is, it can be added if I can think of it and I can dream it. I can do it. So that's a good outlet for me in terms of any of the stuff that I'd like to add for this project. Though obviously, I think that we're looking to strictly stick to the Lights Hope model, which is retro vanilla. It's 1.12 vanilla that everybody loves and remembers. The stuff that we do change, though, is modifying Classic to behave more like Lights Hope. And as a developer, I pick what is the best of the two when given the two options. So, for example, all mobs, armor, HP, and damage values, Lights Hope had some of them lower compared to Classic to where the encounters were easier. If I were to just sweepingly revert everything to Lights Hope values, some of the stuff would be easier then. I don't think that that's what players are looking for, is an easier experience. They want to be challenged. So when redoing the tables, I took only the higher values. I made custom migration scripts that insert all of the things that are higher valued while ignoring anything that's a lower value. So about 2,500 edits right now to the mob values, and through playtesting, the experience definitely is more challenging. It's not done yet in terms of the core. We still have a lot of work to implement mechanics that don't exist in the current iteration of the classic emulation of VMangos. But yeah, we have all the information from classic for stuff that goes on in the game, like mob values and stuff like that. So to have the correct number and see which one plays better between the two is not entirely difficult. It's just a lot of work. It's very tedious to actually go through all of the stuff by hand and correct it. Um, the mechanics that people loved between the two, like heroic strike queuing, stuff like that will be possible. Diamond flask scales with spell power, stuff like that is in the game. Stuff that worked back in Lights Hope and Nostalrius and projects like that, but didn't work in Classic. Like sit procking for Enrage, or Shamans being able to double cast off Elemental Mastery because of the latency. Stuff like that, I'm manually re-adding into the core so that it plays out more like Light's Hope in terms of the player experience that people remember. And it's all the stuff that people say, well, it sucks that it's not in Classic because this is how I remember from the private servers and it was just better. And the secret to that is looking at everything thoroughly on a case-by-case basis and readjusting it for whatever needs to be done for a more modern architecture. I just recently re-added the UBRS Rend event timers along with the combat aggro trigger. So when you start the event, you get locked in combat. You can't drink, and the timers between the waves are much, much shorter.
I was going to say, so you're not waiting 10 years between waves.
Yeah. It was 60 seconds in Classic between every wave. On here, it's 30. You can't drink in combat, and the mobs do a lot more damage. So it's actually very challenging.
That's great.
Trying to do a UBRS 10-man the other day in playtesting, all the players were equipped with pre-bis gear, and we couldn't clear some of the end waves in time before the next one spawned. And we used 3 healers and almost wiped a few times. And that's total pre-bis with enchants. So going into UBRS the first time and trying to get through the Rend event is going to be difficult. The one good thing, obviously, about that is in the early patches, you can bring more than just 10 people in UBRS. You bring 20, 30, 40. The early patches, there's no caps on dungeon limits. So if you're having difficulty, you can always just pile more players in to eventually beat it. You're not going to get stonewalled on it. But yeah, it's going to be challenging. You're probably going to need at least 20 players at the very first clearing to beat it.
Good stuff, man. Look, it's funny because just through that answer, I was reminded of something I was going to ask a bit later on, but I'll bring it up now. On the armor values, and obviously, like you said, you just described the UBRS event, changing timers. A lot of mobs will have their armor values changed. Raids generally will be more difficult than vanilla, but the same as Light's Hope. I pull my minds to a lot of the arguments that you see in things like the Everlook Discord of even now we're doing it all again. We're doomed to have history repeat where the changes versus no changes to a certain degree, those arguments come up. And I must tongue-in-cheek smirk a little bit when people say, finally, Everlook, good old-fashioned, no changes, vanilla server. Fuck yeah, here we go, boys. But I mean, I'm not trying to be facetious, but I think it's pretty easy to say that, even Everlook and most of the private servers that people play, whilst the changes might be minimal, they are playing servers with changes. So whether they know it, they call it no changes, but it's really changes, isn't it?
And that's the thing. Like, people, they like to freak out about any smallest conception of the game that is different from their very narrow mindset. But at the end of the day, they log in and they have fun, and they stop complaining when they're running around the world playing. It's just because they have nothing better to do right now that they're going to bitch and moan about every little possible thing that they can that they perceive as not correct. The fact is, though, private servers, in this one particular, aims to emulate the vanilla experience that was offered by Light's Hope. That's the goal of the project. It falls within the framework of Light's Hope, which is an emulation of vanilla World of Warcraft. We're keeping all of the best things that we can between the two, between Classic and between Light's Hope. But at the end of the day, there hasn't been a real true vanilla since 2005. The Classic didn't deliver it because there was tons of changes in Classic. No emulator has ever done it because it's an incomplete version that's still being worked upon and will be worked upon probably until the sun burns out. There'll never be a perfect replica of vanilla unless Blizzard decides to release the original game on the original hardware. It's so many different facets that will never happen realistically. So these people, they're not the voice of the community. They're just a random person screaming into a sea of piss, and they're entitled to their own opinion. So just respect it and enjoy the server. It's that simple. You'll enjoy it.
Mate, if I can take you down a little segue, you did mention a few minutes ago that you've got your own little vanilla project, that you've everything you could dream up that you want in the game, you've got. One of my questions later on was going to be, Wall, if I asked you personally what your perfect server would look like, what kind of changes would you implement? I'll fast forward that question up to now, just as I say, as a bit of a tangent. What's on this server that you've dreamed up? And just to phrase it a little bit differently, like, again, people don't have to freak out because this is not what's coming with Everlook. This is a hypothetical question. But if you were, a one-man band in charge of Everlook and you were starting up this big, huge new vanilla project, what would you say, like it or not, this is what I'm fucking doing? What changes would you have in there?
I mean, that's basically the premise of Wallcraft, is just create the version of vanilla that I personally like, and if people play it and they don't, that's fine. The server's never been advertised publicly. It's been in development for 2 years, but my ideal version of vanilla is what is outlined in the 2004 Brady Games strategy guide that was published before the game released. There's a lot of alpha WoW ideas in that version, but it's integrated into the 1.12 framework. And there's just a lot of things that almost all players universally just say, wow, that makes a lot of sense. It's just common sense that wasn't done in vanilla, but can be done on a custom project like Wallcraft. When players play vanilla, they don't realize that they're only playing 10% of the game. 90% of the game is locked away in the game files and has never been implemented into the game itself, but it's there. It exists. On Everlook, I could take you to Old Hillsbrad right now, or we could go to the Black Morass, the TBC dungeons. Like, they're in the game. You can't access them without GM commands or back-end editing.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I cut out there.
No, you're right. Sorry. Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, Wallcraft's aim is to take all of that unfinished, unreleased content and refurbish it and add it into the game and structure it in a way that is totally natural to the vanilla environment. This includes items, places, mobs, quests, mostly spells and abilities, though, that is the big draw for players. The Wallcraft talent trees and spells have been essentially reworked into the alpha version, but with like a modern update and a twist. Some of the stuff from later expansions is even backported into it. Priests get like penance, warlocks get metamorphosis, just things that fall within the class fantasy of vanilla that were later seen as part of the class intrinsically have been added because it's an eternal vanilla WoW, with the fundamental philosophy being, what if the developers of the original game had years and years and decades to just complete the game and finish it in the way that they saw fit without any expansions being a question.
On this one, I made, just because I have a little fun sort of thinking about what I would do, but like, do you go in there and in your own little project and do things as extreme as like class balancing?
Oh yeah, and a lot of people don't realize just the amount of comprehensive changes that were made on Wallcraft to better facilitate gameplay. Everything's been extensively tested too. The play testing done on that, just to ensure that the numbers are correct and where they feel right and where they should be, is massive. But even small things under the hood, like for example, I think some of the more prominent ones that you might not really notice at first is things procking when they should proc, or swing timers not being interrupted on a spell that just makes sense for it to not interrupt on. Different abilities functioning
without the mob being immune because of how it works mechanically. You know, tons of stuff under the hood should just kind of smooth out the gameplay in a common sense way. A big example, concussion blow for a warrior can't be used on a mob in a raid because most mobs in raids are totally immune to stuns. It does no damage and it's just a waste of rage. Well, I thought, okay, that doesn't really make sense. Why would anybody even take this ability for a raid environment? Why can't this ability be good in PvP, PvE, in a raid while leveling? You know, you should be able to use it throughout the entirety of your play time on the character without ever saying, well, it's only good for this. So I took that ability and I just changed the way it works on the back end to where it still deals damage with the stun as a side effect. It functions the same, but now it just actually is useful in a lot more situations. Like little changes and little details like that are really what the big focus has been on. Druids now shapeshift between forms without having to shapeshift out. And that's created a new system for power shifting where you don't just shift in and out of cat form to human form repeatedly for extra energy. You now shift between cat and bear to trigger Fuhrer procs to get your rage or your energy. And you use the abilities for a couple seconds until you're out of that resource, and then you swap back over to the different form. You know, it's like it makes the gameplay way smoother and more makes more sense in that regard.
Very good. Yeah, I've just always wondered what, if you ask every WoW player kind of just on the class balancing issues, what they would do to tweak vanilla, to make it a more favorable experience for them. It's always interesting to me to see the first few things that people come up with. But I won't go too far down that garden path. Obviously, it's probably a much longer conversation for another day. But mates, I'll just ask you about something. We're going to get to the Q&A from the community very soon now. Thank you so much, everyone, for sort of putting up with an hour of my very elaborate, sometimes not quite specific, to the project's content questions. But mate, real quick, just in terms of a server management side of things, you and the team, I'm sure as you guys, are looking for more and more people to obviously try and help you out if you do get a fair few players when this thing launches. How does it work in terms of moderation and policing a private server? You guys obviously say things like there's going to be no GD. Let's start with the GDKP thing, which I personally think is brilliant. My disdain for GDKPs has been quite public. I've mentioned it many times on the show. I very much so believe they are not in the spirit of the game, but I have, completely understand that there is a classic community out there that doesn't want to fucking hear it. How do you police GDKPs though? Because I've asked, I've had Brian Birmingham on the show, the lead of Classic WoW. He's talked about the issue. He said, personally, they don't feel it's against terms of service. They don't feel it's something that needs to be policed. If players want to create content that way in terms of a way in which they engage with the raids and whatnot, then, that's on them as long as no one's breaking the rules. And that's why it snowballed into what it snowballed into. But if I now ask of you, you guys have come out and said, we are banning it, which is something, I've wondered if Blizz could even do. How do you do that from a management perspective? Are you understandably, you rely on reports from players, but if you're not getting those reports, are you just there proactively policing chat logs, or how does it work?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of in-game, we usually use a ticket system. We have a lot of back-end tools unique to the project to help facilitate that. Hopefully, we're going to have some stuff set up on the website that also handle that, integrated into it. In terms of staff, yeah, you need people on the staff to basically go through stuff manually and very often in many cases. So just getting people that are reliable, that aren't idiots, that aren't going to create problems, that just want to be helpful. You have to vet them. So we have a good process right now for vetting people. We have some really good people kind of running the community management section right now to understand, who's applying for a position, what experience do they have, how can they contribute to the project. And as a developer, I review the developer apps, and I ask people, if you have experience with vMangos or directly with private servers, you can send me an application on Discord. I'll review it. I'm more than happy to. Preferably, it would have like a GitHub linked with any bug fixes or contributions that you made previously. But a lot of people, if you know like web development or back end stuff for like Discord integration, bots like that, really anything that's tertiary to the project, and you have experience and you can show that you have experience, I'm more than happy to review it. We do get a lot of applications from people who kind of just say, well, I used to do this back in high school and I'm sure I could help out. Well, if you can help out, just go to the vMangos GitHub issue tracker and start fixing bugs in vMangos, because that directly contributes to the project. We're using that core, and any bug fixes made through vMangos helps us and helps everybody within the vMangos community. So start there, and fix a few bugs, and then you can send the GitHub trackers for what you've done. And if you're interested in being seriously, involved in the project, then we can talk after. But if you're looking to dip your toes or get involved in it, just start there, and especially just get your own server compiled. You can run it locally and start looking for bug issues that you can fix.
So in terms of once you get that stuff up and running, in terms of actually, like I say, putting on the police uniform, so to speak, and working the beat on this server, like I said, I've raised the issue of things like GDKPs, and then there's things like you guys have said, multi-boxing is banned. Because I've got no idea how it works, mate. Is it like, it might be a silly question, as a GM, are you able to, I know you're able to, but is it simple to simply trawl through instances, find out if someone is multi-boxing and ban them? Is it easy to dig up a history of chat logs and see, oh, these guys have been whispering, they're secretly doing a GDKP, I will ban them? My question is basically, how hard or easy is it to actually police this stuff?
I mean, it's not hard. We have logs for every trade that goes on in the game. We have systems to automatically detect it. Like I said, this project has a really good back-end GM system, so that stuff is automatically notified. We know pretty much everything that's going down for player interactions. It's automatically tracked and automatically checked. Any red flags that raise within the system are very easy to respond to. So if somebody's doing a GDKP run where they're trading off thousands of gold, we know about it right away. It's not a mystery to us. In terms of like policing chat, we really generally just have a policy of policing public channels. That's why we say, take it to a different platform. You don't have to come in here and treat it like, the boys club. It's treat it like a LinkedIn page for the Discord, and just ask professional questions and be courteous and polite, and you'll be well respected. If you want to be a problem and if you want to be a clown, well, you get dealt with. And we have people that do watch this stuff personally. And a big complaint is from a lot of players right now is whether or not they're going to ever get in trouble for one-off things. No, like we understand our community. We know our community. The team watches the chat. They know who these people are. We play the game with you. You build up a reputation over time. So don't worry too much about that if you're just not being a problem or being a nuisance. Remember, you're playing with thousands and thousands of other players. You're not, and individual players need to understand that they're not some special rock star. It's a big public project. Everybody has a turn. Everybody has a place. Everybody can play. We don't region lock any regions, so anybody can come play, and just treat it respectfully like that. That's really the only notion that you have to take away from it.
All right, guys, we're going to get into the Q&A section very, very, very soon. I've got one more question for Wall, and then I'm out of all my questions that I've prepared for him. So please, in Twitch chat, if you have content-specific questions, I've fucked around enough and asked all the boring questions of Wall that he's done really well with. If you want to get to the meaty stuff, if you want to know about the content, please start typing them in Twitch chat, and I'll fire away the good ones that I find at him. For if we get a few, I'll fire off as many as I can. But I've got one last question for you, mate, before we get to that. The PvP rollout is an interesting one to me, because I've no doubt I know it's probably very, very simple to sit there and say, well, what did they do back in the day? Or what did Lights Hope do? No Battlegrounds at the start. That's how we do it. And that's all well and good. But I do feel like it's a weird situation with PvP where it's kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't. Because we've seen instances of like Battlegrounds in at the start. Then what happens? Well, people level, yes, but they also spend a fuckload of time in Battlegrounds. They're all grinding their honor straight away. No one's out in the world. It seems a bit vapid. And, AV meta for the first couple of months. That's what happened, I believe, with Season of Mastery, and I'm sure on other private servers. Then you've got the other side of the coin where you go, well, that's not how it was back in the day. No Battlegrounds at the start, and they'll come out later. Then obviously you get the meta that is the death balls running through the open world, and these huge packs of Horde and Alliance running around just absolutely trouncing any poor little quester that they see. Now, a lot of people might say, well, that's the game. And it is. It absolutely is. But it's also something that might be a concern. I don't know if it is. If it's a concern to private server, they go, oh, fuck. What if they turn a lot of these players off who are they basically can't quest a la Phase 2 in Classic because of all the murder balls? And like I say, I know it's an easy answer where you go, well, generally you just do it like it was back in the day, no Battlegrounds at the start. But is there a bit more of a, meat on the bones of this argument than people might think?
Yeah, I mean,
Sorry, mate, you cut out for a second.
oh, I'm sorry. I think that it's always been part of the game, but I think the release dates that we have for PvP scheduling kind of alleviate this. We're going to have Honor in at the start. Most people are going to be focused on leveling. People who are hardcore into PvP, you can bypass them pretty easily. They usually don't leave one specific place where they're farming. And even if they're leveling, you can pretty much outpace them if they're just sticking to PvP in a very hardcore fashion. People who like Battlegrounds can rejoice because Battlegrounds get released within about after the first month of the server. And that means World PvP is fun when people are leveling, and it remains fun, but it's not going to be a camp fest like we saw in Phase 2 Classic. The Battlegrounds will be released without Battle Masters for the first month. So you'll have first month of no Battlegrounds, then Battlegrounds with no Battle Masters, and then Battle Masters get released within the first 3 months of the server. That's kind of the timeline we're looking at. And Battlegrounds without Battle Masters leads to a lot of World PvP outside of the Battleground area. There's a lot more traffic going to and from there because that's how you have to queue. You have to go to the specific zone and walk through the tunnel. And once Battle Masters come out, people have already put on Molten Core on farm, and they're farming up other stuff. They're kind of just hanging out in the cities, crafting stuff. It gives them a reason and an excuse to easily just go over to the Battle Master and queue up. And
too easy. Well, the questions are starting to roll in thick and fast. That's my last question of you, mate. Thank you so much again for going through all that. I know some of them might have been, either tough to answer or maybe a little frustrating. I don't know, but you did really well. Mate, are you happy to turn to some of the community questions now for a while and tear through what they've got?
Yeah. If you see any questions on your Twitch or any of the channels, you feel free to just ask.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get stuck into it, guys. As I say, as I'm asking these questions, I'll pick out the good ones and keep throwing them in Twitch chat, and I'll get to them if I can. But question number one, let's go. Well, this might be a 2-second answer. I don't really want to spend much time on this because I know you did this last week in the Q&A. Oregon just says, any news on which AV version we're getting on Everlook? And you guys already answered that. Basically, it's old school AV, landmines and all, right?
Correct. It's going to be old AV all the way up until, I think, patch 1.5, but we might consider keeping it longer. People have a love-hate relationship with AV. It's very fun for the first 2 matches that you play, and then you realize, oh, I got to grind this for actually a couple weeks now, and it's brutal. So we want to give players the old experience in the beginning. We can change it to the faster AV later on, but if players aren't even really queuing into AV and they're not really looking forward to it because they've already done all their AV grinding in the beginning of the server, we could always keep the old version longer. That's something we can play by ear, but you will have the old version at launch.
Too easy. Rausch TV says, how are you implementing the Darkmoon fair buffs?
Darkmoon fair buffs are going to be standard. in terms of how we do that for when the server launches, that's a question. Really, who gets the first one is always a big thing. We could always delay the first Darkmoon Fair buff until after MC, which should be cleared after, just to not give one specific faction an advantage in that race. We have to play that by ear. There's really no determination, but you can kind of expect, just standard vanilla Darkmoon Fair.
All right. Our old friend Kef Tank, you son of a bitch, says, well, you talked about bringing in a lot of alpha content and concepts into your own project, but for Everlook, is it at all possible to implement the spell vulnerability bonus where mobs could have negative resistances, resulting in an increase of elemental damage of whatever school that was present in the game until it was changed in 1.9 to what it's currently in 1.12.1? Is that even possible or desirable to emulate at all?
Yeah, I mean, I could look at it. I'd have to play test it a lot, but negative spell resistance isn't really something that people remember from the experience. It's an older client thing that you really never saw emulated to begin with. The resistance values will be changed to be Light's Hope-like, so mobs' spell damage will hit a lot harder, and player spells will scale a little bit better in that regard, but higher resistance makes it very, very difficult to cast. So I kind of have to see how the system gets reworked in that regard. There's a lot of stuff to do under the hood first, so that's something that'll have to be more so addressed later on. I can't really guarantee or make a determination on that right now.
Fair enough. Mate, you're fucked now. These questions are flying in thick and fast. We're going lightning round. Ty Raw says, will you increase field of view distance for 1.12?
Can't particularly increase view distance. We can from the back end, but it kind of scales depending on how many players there are in a specific area. If we have a massive population at launch and it's 10 to 20,000 players, view distance is probably going to have to be limited just for server stability. However, there's macros to increase the ability to tab target from a greater distance than 30 yards. And there's hopefully no need to ever lower draw distance for players or objects. We just really have to play test and stress test.
Too easy. Mates, let me know if you've answered this one already at the top of this conversation. But my old buddy Ale asks you, how do you handle network and software problems such as N+1 problems that often cause lag and issues on Blizzard servers?
The core has been optimized a lot over the years, and the people working behind the scenes on vMangos are absolutely brilliant. In terms of our own infrastructure, we have Gummy, who's going to be primarily looking at all the data dumps just to make sure that everything's running as smoothly as possible. And very, very specific stuff. Race conditions will be studied. Anything that we see pop up will be analyzed. So hopefully we can counter that before we even have a launch, which is why we kind of want a little bit more time than normal to launch the server and why we're pushing it out further, just to make sure that everything's all configured correctly.
All right. Keep those questions coming, guys. As you can see, we're getting through them pretty quickly. Zuhir asks, random or fixed spawns for Black Lotus, and can dead characters see herbs? This was changed in Classic and was a good change in my opinion and cuts down on mafias and or bots.
I mean, I disagree with that reasoning. I think that dead characters being able to see spawns is a lot more conducive to botting, because then you can just have an automated bot system that has dead characters all over every spawn if they're not dynamic. But even then, you can have unlimited accounts for free. If people are really, really determined to bot, they could abuse that type of facet of the game. So being able to see nodes while dead probably won't be a thing. It's something that we have to look into, so I can't really make a determination. Dynamic spawns for herbs, mostly people are talking about Lotus very specifically. But obviously other spawns can be addressed and they can be looked at. We still have to go back through in that type of data for Light's Hope and compare, because there was a lot of spawns that were bugged. So we don't want to just dump them all back in and then say, well, we got all the bug spawns. That has to be on a very, very case-by-case basis. But there's a few systems I can implement that will change the way that spawn groupings work and make them feel a lot more dynamic. They're not going to just spawn at the same set intervals in specific areas.
Okay. Mate, there's a couple of questions here that I can probably answer for you. Feel free to chime in if I say anything that's incorrect. But we've got questions like Ice Lol asking how are world buffs overall going to work? And then we've got Culinary Code saying, will there be any TBC instances reworked for Classic in this version? And I'll jump in for Wall and say, my understanding of Everlook is this is not like a custom vanilla project. This is a vanilla project. So, things like world buffs being changed, I haven't got the impression from what I've heard so far from the guys that they're tinkering with it at all from what we're used to. And I think anything related to TBC or that kind of, custom content being weaved in or new content being created for this server is not something that's being considered at all, because it's just being focused on a like you said many times, a 1.12 vanilla server. Wall, have I summarized that pretty well?
Yeah, it's going to be the vanilla experience. However, it's something that we can talk about later down the road when Nax Ramus is out, and if we want to extend the server, we could always, put the unreleased TBC content in. That's something that we would talk around that time. So for now, the answer is obviously it's just vanilla. Everything's just standard vanilla 1.12 that you're familiar with. There's not going to be TBC dungeons or anything like that in the game while you're playing. After Nax, though, we can start discussing.
Okay. Rausch TV, is bracket boosting allowed in Everlook?
No, you can't bracket boost. If we find people bracket boosting, all accounts get banned that are participating. Don't manipulate the bracket system. The PvP system is
sacrosanct,
really fun. Yeah, it's sacrosanct. Exactly. It's a chore and it's a challenge for a lot of players. People know what it is, and if you're abusing systems to mess with that, you're hurting everybody else.
Let me throw a question of my own in, mate, even though I should be done. But guys, I've caught up. I'm all up to date with the questions. Please send through more while I ask Wall this one. If you want more questions asked, now is the time to do it. Mate, on the PvP and the honor system, you said something really intriguing last week in the Q&A where you sort of alluded to the decay and everything being borderline impossible to change the structure of on the back end. So I found this really interesting. Is it something that as a developer, people call out for very often? I mean, a lot of people, I shouldn't say a lot of people, some people like the vanilla honor system, I get that, but a lot of people do seem to take issue with it and go, it's fucked, the decay's too heavy, blah, 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 blah. Is it the case that, like, even if you wanted to change it, and we saw Blizzard themselves fucking struggle with this when they changed it with Season of Mastery, is it really hard, if not almost impossible for you guys to fuck with?
Yeah, because it follows a mathematical formula. So yeah, it's the way that the ELO, MMR systems from other games, if you're familiar with chess or really any game that has an MMR system, you understand really how the player numbers skew very widely from being a lot of people at the bottom and very few people at the top. It's a mathematical formula. You can do things to kind of pad it out, like reducing honor decay, but in the end, that just messes up the scaling, and it's not a linear system. So if you're messing with the bottom end, you're going to mess with the top end. The reducing honor decay can be done very delicately to be less punishing, but it doesn't make the grind easier, and all you end up resulting with is a lot more people hitting rank 14 than should for a normal PvP system in vanilla, and that's kind of an issue. The best, most logical way really to resolve the PvP ranking system isn't by changing the system fundamentally, unless you're just totally scrapping it with going new system like TBC's arena token stuff. That's a totally different game, and people might enjoy that system more, but they understand what the vanilla system is and how difficult really it is to hit the top tiers and get that gear that you want. The best solution, as I was saying, though, is by adding a rank 15. And a lot of people will cry about that. And again, it's not something we plan on doing, but just understand from a mathematical perspective why it's the only viable option. And it's because of how the scaling works. Since it's not linear, if you're placing an extra bracket at the top, it creates an easier push down all the way from the bottom all the way up to rank 14. You're basically turning rank 14 grind into a rank 13 grind, which is a lot more attainable for the players, but you're also changing the decay values because there's an extra rank. You're preventing bracket breaking because there's essentially one safety net spot above 14 that players can't eternally grief rank 14 position to hold other people out. They move up to rank 15, and it solves that issue largely. There's a lot of reasons behind a rank 15, and it's part of the VMango's core to where I could just literally flip a 1 to a 0 or a 0 to a 1 and have it in the game. It's not something that we're going to do, or at least plan on doing. We'd have to discuss more about that, but I just want to kind of state the reason why the City Protector rank was originally developed by Blizzard in the beginning. And the fact that it was never added in the game is kind of sad because it would solve a lot of the issues that we see with ranking, but that's just not part of vanilla currently.
Okay, very interesting. Peter J. King asks, will you add the Shifting Sands questline?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you're going to have the AQ gates opening, all that stuff, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I thought that was something else. Okay, yeah, of course that'd be in. My bad. Yeah, I thought that was like some...
We're even talking about adding Talisman of the Binding Shard as a one-time random drop at an old drop chance.
For
it's
one
something that was
person?
part of vanilla. Yeah, one person could get it. It's not a great. It's a necklace that has
it's terrible.
Extra full resistance. Yeah, the resistance values are the best part. Honestly, the necklace isn't bad for a main tank. So if a guild did get one, it would definitely be used. But it's more of a. It's like more of a vanilla quirk that was in the original game. It's just never really been added. If we did it, it would only go towards one player at an ultra low drop chance, so it wouldn't be the first person to kill. Kill any bosses for it. And,
Mates, sorry, I'll make up for that and just say here's one that's near and dear to my heart because I am playing a hunter. Riverin asks the following: will there be any changes to spawn timers on rare mobs such as Lupus or Broken Tooth? This is obviously considerably more significant given that you guys have said Lupus will be in the game at the outset, in his pre-nerf stage.
Yeah, we're talking about, because Lupus is going to be pre-nerf with shadow damage. He's absolute best hunter pet. He is a 41st raid member for absolute certain. If you've never played with a pre-nerf Lupus, he can solo dungeons. Basically, like he is the tank all the way up until he gets a nerf, because the tanks at that point aren't even holding aggro over him, and he doesn't die.
Is he sorry, can I interrupt? Is he really that powerful? I didn't realize, because I play hunter a fair bit and I've never seen pre-nerf Lupus.
Oh yeah, he's absolutely powerful. He is worth 2 party members in a dungeon. You can, if you have the option between taking 2 warriors or a hunter with Lupus, you take the hunter with Lupus because he's going to do more.
Holy
Lupus
shit.
is just that strong. Yeah, like you can go into Molten Core with Lupus as the fucking main tank, and you will have no problem pretty much.
What? Now I'm much more excited.
Lupus is very strong, and that's why people complain, because he will absolute slap. He's extremely tanky. He has a ton of health. He's fast. He is strong. He makes hunters the strongest class in the beginning of the game if he's pre-nerf, which is why we're thinking about it. And instead of giving all players access to Lupus by reducing his spawn time so that there's no crazy competition around it, what we saw on Northdale, where guilds would lock it down and basically sell it. What we consider doing is increasing his spawn time to be extremely long, so that very few people on the server will actually have a Lupus. The ones that do will be very powerful. But if we were to do that, we would decrease the spawn time of Broken Tooth, who is basically the next strongest pet. And that way more people would be able to get Broken Tooth as an alternative to Lupus while they're hunting Lupus. And that when Lupus gets nerfed, Broken Tooth basically becomes the strongest pet that people want to use. So you have Broken Tooth then for a lot of players, and they don't have to struggle going out to farm this mob now.
Yeah, I think I've seen, you would know better than me, I think I've seen unconfirmed, but well-researched guesstimations that Lupus's spawn time was something like between 1 hour and 40 to 1 hour and 50 on Light's Hope, which I thought is quite short.
Yeah, that's not the vanilla timers. That's just the Light's Hope timers.
And
that was done just to make sure that people weren't holding it hostage and selling it for RMT purposes.
Gotcha.
That was like a big Chinese guild thing, really, that
Okay.
was going on.
Okay. Kev Tank's back with another one. He says, per the Darkmoon Fair buff question, when you spoke to the NPC to get the buff, it was always a 1 to 10% random roll on previous private server projects. But Classic was always the max roll, that being 10% damage. Will we get the Classic version or the old private server model of it being a random value?
That'll just be most likely. I can't confirm. We still have yet to decide, but it'll probably just be the classic max buff. And again, it's because Darkmoon Fair is for parsers, and they don't like dealing with random. They want to deal with certainty. If it's in classic, we can add it like that. So that probably will be what we do.
Okay. Tyror, will there be pre 1.4 epic mounts? How long will they be in for?
Yes, there will, and they will be in until the patch appropriate time, so you have to farm it at the beginning of the server. It's quite a grind and a dedication to reach 1,000 gold at the launch of a server for it, but it's a reward for players who do. On Darrowshire, there was only a handful of people who actually managed to get that mount in time, and it's just one of the quirks of vanilla that we want players to be able to have a goal to grind for.
All right. Two Garen biceps. Will the BRD rogue pickpocket farm be allowed? I would have thought, I was said like, oh, I know the answer to this one, but I'll ask anyway. I'll see where you go with it.
Yeah, I mean, you'll be able to pickpocket farm in BRD. It's going to be more akin towards normalized values than stuff that you're used to in the past from private servers.
Yeah, I think Blizzard, sorry to interrupt, I think Blizzard nerfed, I know they nerfed it so that you couldn't do it, but I think some other private servers have nerfed the amount of money you can pickpocket. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, the old private server values for pickpocketing and BRD were way off. They were way higher. That's what people remember.
Oh, higher, okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was because you could get a lot more stuff from the lockboxes and random things that you would get from pickpocketing along with the gold. I have to look into it to really see what feels better in terms of cash generation in the beginning of the game. There's a few other farms that have been nerfed, like the old dog packs, lasher farms, stuff like that from old Lights Hope, where the information was just wrong, so they were just spitting out a lot more gold. It really just depends on how it affects the game economy. We're just going with whatever option's the best in that regard.
Too easy. Main Wheel 77. Are we following the old private server Northdale progression scheme where Warsong Gulch and Narathi Basin come before Alterac Valley?
Yeah, and that's just simply because AV is a monster of its own. When AV comes out, people stop queuing for the other Battlegrounds because they're just grinding AV. So people want to play Warsong, they want to play Arathi. Some stuff that we could look at is releasing the Battleground rep gear a little bit earlier for Warsong and Arathi because that doesn't come out until later in the game. So if people want to have that, somewhere before BWL, that wouldn't be an issue. It's probably not going to be in at launch. I can't confirm, and that's something we still got to discuss. But yeah, very likely Warsong and Arathi will be launched before AV.
Oh, that's
AV
good.
probably won't come out until about 3 months after the server, so you'll have about 2 months to play Warsong and AV.
That's cool to hear. I personally, one of my biggest one of the things I hated the most about Season of Mastery was, I know it's a thing, but like the AV meta where everyone just lived in AV 24/7. No one was doing any fucking WSG or AB at all. And personally, I'm not a big fucking fan of AV. Very little PvP goes on in AV. It's, as we all know, it's rush the boss, blah, blah, blah. I much prefer the other two Battlegrounds, and I hate the meta that comes with, if you want to get the most honor, you've got to go to AV, like it or not. I fucking hate it.
Yeah, people, like I said, AV is its own monster. A lot of people don't like it. Me personally, like I said, I enjoy the first 3 AVs when it comes out, and then I realize it's just a boring grind that I can't AFK through. So you have to just kind of find something to do within the battleground, which more often than not, is not actually PvP. It's like turtling, and then you're just standing there for 4 hours. It's not fun in that regard for me personally. I like Warsong and I like AB, Arathi being my favorite, and a lot of people feel that way. So we want to give people time to enjoy those battlegrounds at least. And once the AV grind is done, 4, 5, 6 months after it's been out, people obviously they go back to the battlegrounds. But
For now, when AV comes out, it always dominates the queues, and it's all that people want to grind because it's the most honor. So it's just the meta of the game. We want to give people opportunity to enjoy the other battlegrounds.
Very good. IceLol asks, spell batching, question mark.
There's always a level of spell batching in any client server structure. There's always going to be some sort of batching. Just how the client and server generate the information to send out. It's not a continuous stream. They send groups of packets, but that's something that you saw in Classic way higher than you did on private servers. Currently, I have it set closer towards Classic values, but I'm going to reduce them just depending on the play tests that we do over the next coming months. But even then, it's still not nearly noticeable as the Classic client spell batching. You want a level of spell batching, though. You do. There's a lot of in-game mechanics that don't function whatsoever without any spell batching, so you need to have some level of spell batching. And there's a lot of things in the game that don't feel right without some level of spell batching. You want like 100 milliseconds to 200 milliseconds of batching for really smooth, fast gameplay. Anything more than that is all right, but you start feeling it. Right now on the developer server, I have 400 MS batching set up just to test stuff. And the duels are really fun because you can, double stun in a duel, or you can, double use abilities that, lock each other out. So it's kind of cool. But I can notice it a little bit on some spells, the little bit of delay. So I kind of want to reduce it maybe down, play test it around 250. And we're going to see how some of the mechanics that rely on batching are still functioning.
Okay. Zoo here again. I think I know the answer to this one, but I would love to hear your thoughts on it, Wall, regardless. GDKPs are banned, but we can still sell DMT and princess loot. Isn't that anti-content when a group could run the dungeon?
The point of banning GDKP isn't for anti-content. That's you're using an argument that's totally different from the point of it. The point of banning GDKP is really to curb real world trading, because GDKP exists pretty much specifically for that purpose. And people can say otherwise. They can say, well, I don't have time to actually join a progression guild, so I just want to be able to buy my way in. Yeah, but it's like asking somebody, do you commit murder? Well, if they do, they're certainly not going to say yes. Say that to a gold buyer. Ask them, do you buy gold? They're going to say no, but we know that they do. And what they do with that gold is they go into a GDKP run and they buy the gear that they want. Anybody that says otherwise is kind of joking or lying to themselves, but that's the reason why GDKP has been traditionally restricted or prohibited on a private server, is because it's an advanced form of laundering, and that's really all it exists as.
Okay. Epoch asked this one. In Classic WoW, it was common for people to kill the quest giver for the Scepter quest. Will there be changes like making that quest giver immune when AQ comes out? Now, I'll just jump in before you get to your answer on this one, Wall. I've got a funny feeling I know where you might go with this one, because you guys addressed last week that, even something as lowball as jumping into Westfall and fucking with the Defias Messenger or whatnot, and mucking around with quest givers or, NPCs that are integral to quests, for the other faction and whatnot. You guys are basically taking the approach that, it's PvP server. If it's got a PvP solution, then we're not going to step in unless something is outrageously egregious. Would this fall in that same category? Sorry, mate, you cut out.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, there's things that are seen as egregious that we will address and adjust. If you're referring to the Defias Trader, yeah, like we don't have any plans on doing anything like that. Like that can be skipped. If people are hardcore griefing the shifting Sans quest NPC to where you can't actually progress in the quest, it only takes a day or two to actually address that, and then it can go back to normal. If there's a big issue, we'll look into it to where it's not, if it's restricting the gameplay to such a degree that we need to intervene, then we will. Other than that, we have a hands-off approach, and we'd rather just see it that way. The big issue is the back end problems. And for stuff that is considered extensive or egregious and it's causing problems for the staff, and consuming their time, that's really when we have to start looking into things. But other than that, whatever happens in the game world is part of the game world.
All right. I'm not sure if we touched on this one before in the previous Black Lotus question, but just in case, Vuv says, is the Black Lotus spawn rate going to be classic like or Light's Hope like? I'm not sure of the difference. You might have to explain it to me.
We haven't looked into the dynamic scaling of Lotus spawns. It just really depends on the player population, and we'll play it by ear. That's one of those things that we can easily address within 10 minutes of deciding to do it. So it's not like something that we really need to do anything about until it's a problem. If there's 20,000 players and they're all trying to farm Lotus and there's not enough to go around, we can increase the spawn times. That's not a difficulty for us. So really whatever feels best for the player base.
Okay.
But dynamic spawns of things like Lotus aren't really planned at the launch. It's going to be something that we can do if we need to.
All right. Stone Grim, your question was answered last week, but I'll throw it in there anyway. Real quick answer. Will Korak be available in AV like an original vanilla? The answer is yes. Is that right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you can complete Korak. People basically just want to make sure that you're able to do the quest. That's really the big part of it. And yeah, like you can complete the quest. There's no problem there. So he's going to be in AV.
Beautiful. Mate, we were all caught up with the questions. Guys, I think you've got to head off in about 15 minutes, don't you?
Yeah, I want to take off now, grab something to eat.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I was just going to say there's no time like the present. We've caught up with all the questions. I've asked all of mine. Wall, you've been fantastic, mate. Let me just say, thank you so much for taking, as much time as you did to do this. And I really appreciate it. Please, by all means, shout out whoever you want to shout out and give people any information they might need moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to thank all the people that are involved in the project, and I'd like to thank the community. All my friends who have stood by me over the years, I'd like to thank them as well. But really, it's the players that we do this for, and we enjoy the game ourselves as developers and as staff, and that's why we put so much time and effort into it. And for all the people that are working behind the scenes, different aspects of the project that aren't directly involved within the project, I'd like to thank the most because they've given us the tools and the resources really necessary to do this. We're standing on the shoulders of a lot of different great people who people don't even recognize. Some of them are in the chat right now and they don't even recognize as somebody who's contributed more to the health and well-being of vanilla WoW private servers than anyone else, or for most, a majority. So it's like those people that go unrecognized for the amount of work that they do, I'd really like to thank the most.
Beautiful. Very good. And I'm just trying to think in terms of links or websites or anything. Sorry, I'm not sure if you just mentioned there is a website, isn't there?
Yeah, everlook.org, and there's going to be more info posted on that soon. We're going to have the PTR up, and it will be located at the everlook.org realm list domain. And feel free to check it out. I would say come into the discord/everlook.org. Here, let me get the official link though, and we can post that in the chat here. But yeah, it's just tell your friends, spam about the server, tell them it's a good project that you're going to enjoy. And we're going to have a lot more promo material coming out in the next coming couple weeks and months. So a lot more visibility and publicity. We just picked out the name. We just chose the logo. We just named the project. This Discord's been open for a little over 2 weeks and it's got massive hype and it's just going to keep growing. I'll tell you that.
Beautiful. Well, mate, we'll leave it there. I'll like I said, I'll publish this one in a couple of days. Once I've published it, I'll let you know, Wall, in case you want to let the Discord know about it or anything. It's funny you talk about the publicity and everything. I've been thinking about the server a lot over the last week, to be honest. I started fucking around and I made a video over the last couple of days that as a bit of a advertisement and hype train thing for the server. I'll play it on stream, mate. If you've got to go, you can go, but I'll play it on stream now. If you guys like what you see, by all means, yeah, let people in the Discord know about it and they can have a bit of a watch. It only goes for 2 minutes, but yeah, thanks, Wall, mate. I'll catch you later. I'll speak to you soon.
It's a pleasure. And yeah, link me that video. I'll post it up on the news thing.
Will do. All right, mate. I'll talk to you later.